Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. We dissect the first presidential debate to analyze the policies each candidate stands for and how strongly they represent them. House Republicans release a report on countering China. That's after the communist regime came up in the first presidential debate last night. And a second explosion in central China this week, this time at a chemical plant. Over 100 firefighters were dispatched to the scene. With interruptions coming from all sides during last night's presidential debate, it may have been tough to pinpoint exactly which policies each candidate stands behind. We sat down with the Epoch Times investigative reporter Joshua Phillip to try to nail down key takeaways from main topics discussed last night.
Last night's debate, riddled with attacks propped up by half-truths, may have left many Americans more confused than informed by the end of the debate. Phillip suggests that to make sense of it, Americans should take a step back and look into each candidate's general policies to decide which candidate best represents their ideas and beliefs.
If we really boil it down, based on my analysis, Trump's position is smaller government, less government intervention, lower taxes, and getting rid of different policies that he believes promote division, anti-Americanism, and divisions among races and so on, like critical race theory. Biden's position is bigger government, more taxes, more federal involvement in local government policies, things like policies tied to the Green New Deal, and a lot of race politics. Some people align with one, some align with the other, but this is what it really boils down to.
However, these policies were often drowned out with attacks that were many times false claims. For example, Biden accused Trump of not helping small businesses who suffered from the pandemic.
Nothing. They're closing. 1 in 6 is now gone. He ought to get on the job and take care of the needs of the American people so we can open safely. All right.
However, Trump approved the Paycheck Protection Program in April. It distributed more than $500 billion in forgivable loans to small businesses. It helped more than 5 million small businesses pay their workers. And Trump attacked Biden by saying no law enforcement supports him.
He has no law enforcement
That's
support.
not true.
Almost
That's
nothing.
Look.
Oh, really? Who do you have? Name one group that supports you. Name one group that came out and supported you. Go ahead.
Trump claimed that the Portland sheriff endorsed him. While Trump has had a number of endorsements from law enforcement groups across the nation, Portland's sheriff was not one of them.
And this is unfortunately one of the ways that politics works. You have political talking points based oftentimes on half-truths. The half-truths are used to frame attacks on the other individual to make it appear that they have a certain type of character or a certain type of alignment, which may not be totally true.
So how can citizens tune out the noise of personal attacks and the claims pulled out of context? To prepare for the next debate, Phillip suggests analyzing each person's performance.
Because you want to see, is this person strong enough to go to other countries and negotiate trade deals? Does this person have a strong enough character to go to XYZ country during a time of crisis and say, these are the interests of my country, you need to respect them? When it comes to the position,
he says debates are an example of how they will perform in office and among other world leaders. So simply analyzing their ability to stand their ground can be enough to decide which candidate will have a bigger impact as the country's leader over the next 4 years. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
And after the chaos that unfolded on stage last night, the Commission on Presidential Debates says it may change the format of future debates. The commission says it plans to make changes to ensure a more orderly discussion of the issues in future debates. The announcement came after Biden told reporters he hoped debates would be organized differently in the future. Trump wrote in a tweet that future debates should have a different anchor and, in a dig to Biden, different candidate too. Both sides of the Trump-Biden divide declared victory over last night's first presidential debate, but who do the American people think came out on top? Let's see what the polls say.
Both CNN and CBS conducted polls immediately after the debate using independent research companies. 6 in 10 of the nearly 570 people CNN polled said Biden did the best job in Tuesday's debate, and just 28% said Trump did. The CBS News poll showed a closer contest between the two candidates, with 41% saying Trump won the debate and 48% saying Biden. 10% thought it was a tie. New Jersey Advanced Media poll also had the candidates neck and neck. As of this afternoon, over 330,000 people voted. 51.6% thought Trump won and 48.4% thought Biden did. 3 major polls conducted on Twitter show a clear winner in the minds of some who saw the debate. Over 330,000 people voted in this political poll survey, and 21.9% thought Biden won. 62% of them thought Trump won. The rest were unsure or thought neither did. 78% thought Trump won the debate, and just 21.2% thought Biden won, according to this Breaking 911 poll that had over 150,000 votes. The poll that had the biggest variation in results came from Fox 35 Orlando. Of over 19,000 people polled, 80.1% thought Trump won, and only 19.9% thought Biden did.
Last night's debate has drawn a mixed reaction from New Yorkers. Some claim the moderator was biased, others argue he was fair. Many were dissatisfied with the conduct of the two candidates. NTD's Kevin Hogan has more on their reactions.
Trump, in fact, you said that again.
Tuesday's presidential debate caused quite a stir in the Big Apple.
Folks, do you have any idea what this clown's doing?
After Trump's repeated interruptions and Biden's calling the president a clown, some New Yorkers were less than thrilled.
I don't think that I want to criticize Biden because he was in a terrible position up there, being interrupted constantly, not giving a chance to speak, not able to finish his thoughts. It was just a sham.
Some said it wasn't a debate, but instead a lecture by Trump, and others said Chris Wallace wasn't tough enough to handle the job of moderator. One passerby said the debate gave their friends in Europe a bad impression of America.
I became an American not long ago because I really wanted to vote for the first time in my life. And I looked at that last night and I said, I wonder if I didn't make a mistake.
New Yorkers expressed a variety of reactions to the debate. Some called it such a disgrace they actually lost sleep over it, whereas others found it entertaining. One person said the moderator, Chris Wallace, was biased in favor of Biden and that Trump was up against the two of them. But he refused to come out publicly in saying this out of fear of people discovering his right-leaning views. Others said Wallace had his hands full, keeping the two candidates in check.
Next time, if I would do this, I will make sure that they're farther away from each other and their microphones need to be muted, period.
Viewers from Boston, Atlanta, and St. Louis also share their perspectives on the debate.
The debate itself, I'd say, is a little chaotic, very chaotic.
What I heard were two adult males attempting to convey a message, but in a manner that was more becoming of the children on the school bus.
I thought it was a mess.
I think it was just a huge embarrassment for the country.
They allow the candidates way too much ability to interrupt each other, and they never answer the questions.
The debate last night was really, for no better word, it was a food fight. I mean, not much information was given. Didn't learn anything they didn't already know.
The vice presidential debate is next Wednesday, and the second presidential debate will be on October 15th in Miami, with C-SPAN's Steve Scully as the moderator. Kevin Hogan, NTD News, New York.
After a night of debating, both President Trump and Joe Biden are back on the campaign trail. The two presidential candidates shared their thoughts on last night's debate and some contentious issues that were brought up.
Leaving the White House for this evening's campaign events in Minnesota, Trump told reporters what he thought of last night's debate.
I thought the debate last night was great. We've gotten tremendous reviews on it. We're hitting what people want, law and order, which Biden was unable to even talk about because it'd lose the radical left, his radical left followers. I don't think there's too many of them left. But I thought it was a great evening.
Trump was also asked about the comments he made about the Proud Boys, saying he should stand back and stand by.
I don't know who the Proud Boys are. I mean, you'll have to give me a definition because I really don't know who they are. I can only say they have to stand down, let law enforcement do their work. Law enforcement will do the work more and more as people see how bad this radical liberal Democrat movement is and how weak.
Later this evening, Trump is holding a rally in Duluth in the northern region of Minnesota. Trump lost Minnesota in 2016 by just 1.5 percentage points. So this time around, he's focusing on the state. His campaign is optimistic he can flip it. Meanwhile, on the Democratic campaign trail, Biden and his wife Jill toured eastern Ohio and western Pennsylvania by train, starting their journey from Cleveland. On the train, the Bidens were joined by concerned voters who expressed their worries about jobs and health care to the Democratic candidate. Out of the window, Biden and Trump supporters crowded along the roadside. The train made its final Ohio stop in Alliance, where Biden spoke about last night's debate. He addressed President Trump's claim that he supports the Green New Deal.
The Green New Deal that the president keeps trying to talk about, it's not a bad deal, but it's not the plan I have. That's the Biden Green Deal. That's what it's about. And what the president keeps trying to do is he's trying to run against somebody other than me. I've said to the left, the right, and the center exactly where I am on each of these issues. I'm not worried about losing the left, right, or the center of the party. This is a big party. But I have one of the most progressive records of any Democrats run on. I'm proud of it, but it's my record, and it's what I want to do.
During a Q&A, Biden said he hopes the rules of the next debate will be updated so that no one is able to talk longer than their allocated time. He also condemned the Proud Boys group after being asked about the group's embrace of Trump's remarks last night.
My message to the Proud Boys and every other white supremacist group is cease and desist. That's not who we are. This is not who we are as Americans.
Biden is seeking to flip both Ohio and Pennsylvania after Trump won both states in 2016.
The Senate has voted to advance a short-term spending bill. It extends funding to the government through December 11th. The Senate voted 82-6 to advance the bill. Republicans cast the 6 no votes. It would avert a government shutdown on October 1st if it's passed and signed into law by President Trump. It maintains current funding levels for most programs, and it accounts for about 30% of the federal government's day-to-day budget. The bill is expected to pass before the new budget year starts on Thursday. And the Justice Department is expected to sue Google as soon as next week. Reuters reports the DOJ is urging state attorneys general to sign on to the anti-law trust lawsuit. It's expected to accuse Google of trying to put rivals at a disadvantage by depriving them of data about users so they can't improve their advertisements. The DOJ has also been investigating Google's search advertising. Google controls the sale of ad space and the tools that make ad sales. Google has denied any wrongdoing, and the Justice Department declined to comment. Many state attorneys general are already investigating other Google businesses, and according to Reuters sources, they're considering whether to sign on to the federal lawsuit. And coming up, New York's governor says he might call on the National Guard to pick up excess garbage in the city. He stressed the importance of keeping the streets clean during a pandemic. And contrary to an FBI report showing nationwide crime went down in 2019, we're seeing a continuous rise in violent shootings in New York City this year. We analyze the situation with Sergeant Joseph Impietrice. Hear what he has to say after the break. Months ago, the National Guard came to New York City to help flatten the virus curve. Now, as the city's streets have become loaded with trash, the National Guard might return to help with cleaning up.
New York City's garbage is piling up. Since the beginning of the pandemic, sidewalks and trash bins have been accumulating with trash. The garbage comes from people staying at home for long periods of time and insufficient funds for garbage collectors. New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo said he'll send in the National Guard if the city can't handle the overwhelming garbage.
If the New York City Department of Sanitation and Resources can't do it for one reason or another, I can deploy the National Guard. We'll come in. I understand there's a higher level because people are staying at home.
The economic crisis caused by the pandemic led to a $25 million cut from the sanitation department's budget in July. That meant a 60% reduction in pickups of public trash baskets. Governor Cuomo said keeping the city garbage free is important during a pandemic.
I think that would be important. This is a public health pandemic. Cleanliness matters. You know, we made millions of gallons of hand sanitizer, right? Cleanliness matters.
Earlier this month, the city's mayor, Bill de Blasio, announced a plan to boost trash pickup and reduce garbage on the streets. He said the plan will restore 65 weekly litter basket trucks in 27 neighborhoods.
Violence in New York City has been escalating since May, with the number of shootings climbing each month. We spoke with the NYPD and Blue Lives Matter founder Joseph and Beatrice for an analysis on the current situation.
According to a recent FBI report, violent crime decreased in 2019 for the third consecutive year. But this year, gun violence in New York City has been surging since May. Between June 1st and September 20th, 1,017 people were shot. Murder is up 60% year over year since May. The city hasn't seen such levels of violence since the mid-1990s. Since May, there has been an increase in number of shootings across the city. 113 people were shot in May, nearly 55% more than the data from May 2019. And the trend is increasing every month. As of September 27th, 136 people have been shot this month. This is a nearly 210% increase year over year. We spoke to Joseph Imperatrice for his analysis on the cause of the situation.
It boils down to failed political leadership. It comes down to the politicians in New York City constantly going after the police officers, taking resources away, criminalizing them, putting officers showing up to do their jobs and being penalized for doing them.
Imperatrice maintained that the government officials also went easy on criminals as political stunts to garner potential votes in the future. He said these actions give criminals a message that they are in control and can get away with crime. Imperatrice also claimed bills like the diaphragm bill, which outlaws officers from pressing their knee against a suspect's back or chest during an arrest, made it harder for police to do their job. Other officers and experts have warned this measure could lead to police using more severe methods, such as tasers, or avoid arrests altogether. In June, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced that the police department's budget would be cut by $1 billion. New bail reform banned judges from requiring cash bail for most nonviolent and some lower-level violent crimes, resulting in criminals getting quickly back on the streets after arrests. De Blasio said that the effects of the pandemic were to blame for the upsurge in violence. Imperatrice urged the community to work together, saying positive changes and respect started from the home, and emphasized the need to go back to respectful policing. He said officers must be allowed to enforce the law as written and enforce the Constitution as written. He maintained politicians who have no experience in policing should not dictate police officers on how to do their jobs. He also claimed this trend of violence would only change if we changed the political leaders in power today.
That no matter what side of the aisle you're on, you are elected for safety, for law and order. Whether you're a resident or whether you're a visitor, no matter what political belief you have, that is your number one concern. And they put their pride and their own, ambitions ahead of that. And that's wrong. And that's what needs to change.
Christina Kim, NTD News.
Up next, an explosion rocks a chemical plant in central China. Over 100 firefighters were dispatched to the scene. It's the second blast to hit the country this week. And House Republicans released a report on countering China, giving hundreds of suggestions on just how to do it. That's after the communist regime came up last night during the first presidential debate. Find out more after the break. Both Trump and Biden touched on China in last night's presidential debate. While overseas, a Chinese chemical plant was rocked by explosions. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more on those developments.
First, we take a look at an explosion in a chemical plant in central China. It's the second blast to strike the country this week. Early Wednesday morning, an explosion went off in a chemical plant in Luoyang City inside China's Henan province. According to Chinese media, a total of 30 fire trucks and more than 100 firefighters were dispatched to the scene. No casualties have been reported so far, if the official figures are accurate. According to one local, there were actually multiple blasts. After the explosions, bystanders posted pictures and videos on Chinese social platform Weibo. But the posts have since been taken down by authorities, in line with China's strict internet censorship. The chemical company is called Zhongtulihe and mainly produces petroleum products. 4 years ago, it was punished by city officials for violating work safety law. The incident comes after another chemical plant explosion on Monday. That blast also struck central China. But in Hubei province instead, 5 people were killed. China was a hot topic in the first presidential debate Tuesday night. Despite a divide on most issues, both Trump and Biden agreed the U.S. must take a tougher stance on China. Biden criticized Trump for praising Chinese leader Xi Jinping's early response to the virus outbreak, while Trump said under Biden, millions would have died. Trump blamed China for the pandemic, adding the country's official numbers cannot be trusted.
It's China's fault. It should have never happened. They stopped it from going in, but it was China's fault. And by the way, when you talk about numbers, you don't know how many people died in China. You don't know how many people died in Russia. You don't know how many people died in India. They don't exactly give you a straight count.
The Chinese regime's impact on the economy also made it into the debate. Biden called out Trump's China deal, saying it hadn't lived up to expectations.
He talks about these great trade deals. You know, he talks about the art of the deal. China's perfected the art of the steal. We have a higher deficit with China now than we did before.
Trump shot back saying China ate your lunch, Joe, adding that Hunter Biden had a lot of dealings with China, Russia, and the Ukraine. Trump added the economy had been great before what he called the China plague.
So we built the greatest economy in history. We closed it down because of the China plague. When the plague came in, we closed it down, which was very hard.
While there were no direct questions relating to China in this presidential debate, it's unclear if there will be in the next one. The candidates are scheduled to face off again on October 15th.
The U.S. has failed in its China policy over the past decades. That's the conclusion of a new report by U.S. congressional Republicans, and it gives hundreds of recommendations for countering the threat of China's communist regime.
House Republicans released a report on combating the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, on Wednesday. It's the result of a months-long probe into a group of Congress members called the China Task Force. The report includes hundreds of recommendations on how the U.S. can better deal with the threat of Beijing's totalitarian regime and assure safety and prosperity in the U.S. 60% of all ideas in the report have bipartisan support. At the press conference, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy described the threat of Communist China as one of the most pressing issues that Americans have for the next century. The CCP virus and China's cover-up were among the report's focuses, as well as the urgency of moving supply chains out of China and back to the U.S.
Our top scientists wanted to go to Wuhan to find out what was really going on. Their scientists wanted us to go to China. They wanted us to come in to help them figure out what was going on with this virus. And it was the Chinese Communist Party who stepped in and said no. We could have had invaluable knowledge about what was going on to save American lives. Lives all around the world would have been saved if China was just honest with everybody else, but they weren't.
And for decades, the United States and its allies have been asleep at the wheel until COVID-19. COVID created an awakening experience for the American people, and the sleeping giant has finally awoken.
The supply chain issue was listed as one of the report's major items. The shortages of personal protective equipment in the U.S. at the start of the pandemic were a wake-up call, highlighting U.S. dependence on China's supply chain.
We must take steps to protect these critical supply chains. We simply cannot afford to wait any longer. Our national security depends on it. The Chinese Communist Party is the greatest long-term threat to the interests of the United States of America.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney emphasized the need to allow the Department of Defense to fund experimental technology. That way, U.S. military technology can be improved more quickly to counter China's growing military threat.
And we must counter the Chinese Communist Party globally as it seeks to establish more robust logistics and basing infrastructure around the world as it seeks to project its own military power. In conclusion, it is very important for everyone to note that we are in the midst of a battle between freedom and totalitarianism. The question we all face is whether the United States and our allies will set the rules of the road into the future, or whether the Chinese Communist Party and that authoritarian, totalitarian regime will set the rules of the road.
Congressman Michael McCaul, chairman of the China Task Force, said the report will shape America's China policy for years to come, adding that the U.S. should work together with its allies.
But it's also important in this report we point out to support our allies in the region, and that is South Korea, who's under threat from China, and that is Hong Kong, who was invaded by China in violation of the UK-Sino Treaty, to Taiwan, where China parades its military, its warships, in the Taiwan Straits every day, to the South China Sea that threatens not only Taiwan, but Malaysia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. It's important that we work with our allies to win this global competition.
McCaul criticized the United Nations for being influenced by the CCP and vowed to reform the organization.
And we talk a lot about the United Nations, how China has systematically taken over key positions in the United Nations, including the WHO, which failed in its #1 responsibility to alert the world to a global pandemic because Tedros was President Xi's handpicked candidate. We need to take more of these positions back, that not just the United States, but our allies, so that the body that we fund so much and pay so much money to can be better represented for freedom and democracy.
The report also suggests requiring the Treasury Department to sanction China, strengthen its scrutiny of Chinese investment in the U.S., and sign a free trade agreement with Taiwan.
Hope fades for another $25 billion in airline aid. Washington leaders say there's still more work to do on the relief package. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin wants airlines to pause thousands of scheduled furloughs this week. He says there could be a bipartisan stimulus deal on the horizon. Airlines want a second $25 billion bailout to protect jobs for another 6 months. The current payroll support package is set to expire at midnight, so airline workers are begging lawmakers to make a deal. Mnuchin met with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi earlier today, and they discussed the prospects for a broad package. We're still waiting for the outcome of that meeting, but U.S. airline shares jumped on the news. And office employees in Manhattan are slowly returning to work, but it's at a much lower rate than the rest of the country. New York City businesses are feeling the impact, especially those that rely on foot traffic from offices.
Only about 10% of Manhattan's office workers were back at their desks as of September 18th. That's according to commercial real estate services firm CBRE Group. This is only somewhat higher than in July, when it was below 10%. The impact of Manhattan's low office occupancy rates on local businesses could be dire, especially for those that depend on foot traffic like restaurants. New York City is set to resume indoor dining at 25% capacity on Wednesday. But many restaurant owners warn that this may be too little too late.
It costs more to run a business.
Hundreds of protesters marched in New York's Midtown Manhattan on Monday toward Governor Andrew Cuomo's office.
50%!
They called for indoor dining to be raised to at least 50% capacity.
2/3 of restaurants are going to be going under, if they haven't already. And we might be one of them if they don't pass this 50%. We're not going to make it till November, and that's the truth. We probably have maybe 4 weeks left in us.
Low office occupancy rates in New York City have also had an impact on the city's tax base. The city is projecting a $9 billion drop in sales tax and other revenue for its fiscal year that began on July 1st.
Seattle City Council is raising the minimum wage for Uber and Lyft drivers to over $16 per hour. But rideshare companies say the new expenses will actually destroy thousands of jobs. Lyft says Seattle's plan is deeply flawed. A similar regulation was passed in New York City. Some drivers there were eventually locked out from using the app. We spoke to a driver who says the pay was actually better before they increased the minimum wage.
Then the city council came up with some bills, and they were trying to help the drivers, and they created the minimum wage. And at that very moment, they were ecstatic. They clapped and they applauded, but they didn't realize what they were getting crumbs. Drivers know now that it didn't help. No, that's not enough. That's not enough. A person that works at McDonald's makes $15 an hour. What the companies did was they started locking out the drivers. So now drivers are fighting to get their rating up, to do more rides. It's not helping. It's made it even worse. I tell drivers all the time, we're independent contractors. We supposed to set in our own terms, rates, and conditions. We supposed to set them. I like the pay I was getting before. I was making more back then.
A top executive involved in an emissions cheating scandal is standing trial in Germany. He's facing fraud charges related to Volkswagen's cheating regulations.
Former leading Audi engineer Giovanni P's trial has kicked off. He is facing charges for the infamous Volkswagen emissions cheating scandal. His defense lawyers said their client was being unfairly held responsible and that the buck stopped firmly at the door of the general management.
We see that the main responsibility lies with the organization and that the blame lies squarely with them, and we strongly regret that there is no corporation law case.
He added that it wasn't just one person who was building the car. Many people were involved, and according to him, there was full transparency, especially in the departments being run by their clients. He said ultimate responsibility rests with the management board.
The question will also arise of the lack of supervision. I mean, there is the Federal Motor Transport Authority, KBA. Should they claim they didn't know anything about what was happening in the last 10, 20 years? That leaves a question mark.
Giovanni and 3 other defendants were in court on charges of fraud. Among those defendants was also the former chief executive of Audi. The Volkswagen scandal was uncovered by the United States regulators 5 years ago. Volkswagen and Audi were caught disguising excessive diesel pollution by using illegal engine management software during anti-pollution tests.
Up next, the UK and Canada become the first major Western countries to impose sanctions on Belarusian officials, including President Alexander Lukashenko and his son. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is calling on people to be patient with new measures to tackle COVID-19 and to sacrifice for the safety of others. Find out more after the break. Over to Europe. 15 whales were stranded on a beach in Spain. 9 of them have died, and local residents managed to help the rest back to sea. NTD UK's Neil Woodrow will bring us more news from Europe.
Thanks. Welcome to NTD UK with UK and European news. 9 short-finned pilot whales stranded on a northern Spanish beach have died. The whales were spotted on Monday on the Morris Beach in Carreño, Asturias. 6 others were still alive. Local authorities and residents managed to help them return to sea. The bodies of the 9 dead whales will undergo an autopsy in the nearby town of Gijón. Images of stranded whales attracted worldwide attention earlier this month in Australia, where hundreds died. Britain imposes sanctions on 8 Belarusian officials, including President Alexander Lukashenko.
Lukashenko's son Viktor, Belarusian National Security Advisor and Chief of Staff, are among the 8 sanctioned officials. Measures include travel bans and asset freezes.
Well, I think first and foremost there must be a cost, there must be a price with the kind of human rights abuses that we've seen and the fraudulent approach to that election, which is clear now from all of the independent reporting.
More than 12,000 people have been arrested during the widespread protest against President Alexander Lukashenko. He declared a landslide victory in the presidential election on August 9th, but opponents say the results are rigged.
We can't just have a situation where the likes of Alexander Lukashenko and, frankly, Vladimir Putin think that the human rights abuses and the rigging of that election can just pass without them being held to account and without some kind of price.
Canada is also imposing sanctions against Lukashenko and 10 Belarusian officials. The sanctions are the first to be implemented by major Western countries over the crisis in Belarus. The European Union and the US are also working on their own sanctions.
British Foreign Minister Dominic Raab is meeting with his Vietnamese counterpart Pham Binh Minh in Hanoi. The two pledged to strengthen ties between their two countries. During his two-day visit, Raab is scheduled to meet with the Vietnamese Prime Minister and also hold virtual meetings with other foreign ministers of ASEAN member countries. The UK government is looking to strengthen its relationship with the ASEAN bloc. And Royal Dutch Shell says it's cutting up to 9,000 jobs as oil demand slumps. Shell employs 83,000 people worldwide. It says the reorganization will save them around $2 to $2.5 billion annually. Since the pandemic, Shell's profits dropped significantly. They suffered a 46% fall in the first quarter and an 82% fall in the second quarter. Reducing costs is also vital for the company's plan to move into the power sector and renewables. And UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson says new measures to tackle the rise in COVID-19 cases will take time to show effect.
Johnson thanks everyone for their efforts, especially university students, but he's calling for people to be more patient.
And no matter how impatient we may be, how fed up we may become, there is only one way of doing this, and that's by showing a collective forbearance, common sense, and willingness to make sacrifices for the safety of others.
The latest figures show that there are more than 7,000 new cases with 71 deaths. Johnson says the current figures show the UK should stick to its current plan.
That if the evidence requires it, we will not hesitate to take further measures that would, I'm afraid, be more costly than the ones we put into effect now.
Many in the UK are subject to local restrictions. Over 16.5 million people, about a quarter of the population, are banned from meeting anyone outside their own household.
The German government is planning tougher oversight of telecoms network vendors. According to a German business newspaper, Germany is raising the bar for participation in 5G networks. The decision will make it harder for Huawei to keep a foothold in Europe's largest market. European governments have been reviewing Huawei's role in their 5G networks following pressure from the US. A German doctor admits to masterminding an international doping ring on Tuesday. The doctor, identified only as Mark S., confessed to conducting blood doping for at least 23 athletes from 8 countries. He says in a statement that he did not make a profit from doping and has never put the athlete's health at risk. Prosecutors say he was behind performance-enhancing blood transfusions, mostly for cross-country skiers and cyclists. They believe that his conduct goes back to as early as 2011. 4 other suspects accused of helping him are also on trial. If convicted, the doctor could face up to 10 years behind bars. And a French fighter jet breaks the sound barrier, causing a sonic boom that reverberated through Paris. Scrambling to join a commercial jet that lost contact with air traffic control, the warplane flew at a speed faster than sound, creating shockwaves and a huge sonic boom. It rattled windows, scattered startled birds, and even interrupted tennis at the French Open. Emergency services were flooded by calls. Seconds after the boom, the commercial jet re-established contact with air control. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. Over to New York.
Thanks, Neil. And Spanish authorities are in a constant battle against drug traffickers. Now they've made a record catch of 35 tons of hashish.
Spanish authorities have seized 35 tons of hashish hidden in 4 sailboats. Local authorities said on Wednesday that it was their biggest drug bust at sea.
We have reached a very important achievement in the fight against drug trafficking. Between the 24th and 28th of September, an operation was carried out which resulted in the interception of 4 vessels with the cooperation of 5 countries and the seizure of 35 tons of hashish.
9 Bulgarian and Russian citizens were arrested in the raid. Authorities said the raid crippled the ability of Bulgarian criminal organizations to use recreational boats for drug trafficking. This prevents new routes from emerging and slows their ability to take advantage of the pandemic. Earlier this year, around 5 tons of hashish were seized in 2 sailboats from the same criminal group near the Balearic Islands.
Coming up, as part of a long tradition, people in a French city celebrate the Catholic saint Joan of Arc. We take a look at the woman who was burned at the stake and later canonized. And an ambulance service in the UK is experimenting with an Iron Man-like rescue suit. The technology could be a big step for first responders. That and more after the break. And to France, 2020 marks the 100th anniversary of Joan of Arc's consecration. The young saint who fought for the French king still inspires hope and continues to be celebrated in the country. Our France correspondent David Vives has the story.
The French city of Orleans returns to medieval times for 1 week of celebration. The so-called Virgin of Orleans, Joan of Arc, came here about 590 years ago and managed to get the city back to France's kingdom from the British Army.
The city of Orleans has a long tradition and we continue it through the year.
Though the restrictions due to the virus meant a scaled-down event, Orleans residents came to pay honor to the saint, as they do every year. The Virgin of Orleans is also celebrated throughout the year for the 100th anniversary of her consecration. To understand her importance in history, we went to a prestigious monument in France, the Pantheon.
Of course, Joan of Arc participated in the most important events that shaped our history.
This is where many important historical figures remain, and where the glorious stories of saints are told.
Joan of Arc is one of the greatest leaders in France's history. Though she was a young peasant girl, her faith made her able to command an entire army and lead it to victory.
When she was 16 years old, Joan of Arc is said to have heard a call from divine saints. She was told to take back the cities of Orleans and Paris from the British and to organize the French king's religious sacrament in Reims Cathedral. There are testimonies of her miracles throughout her life, but like many other Christian martyrs, she eventually had to endure persecution. She was burned alive when caught by enemies of the king. According to Pantheon General Manager David Medrick, though France's Republic regime tried to distance itself from the monarchy after the French Revolution, the saints' lives, including Joan of Arc, are the roots of France's history.
God called Joan of Arc to take arms, so her destiny was to accomplish the divine wish. She had to fight to make it true, and was met with such a tragic end. Joan is universal. She was so dedicated and could overcome her challenges for others.
The Virgin of Orleans continues to be present in cultural references, books, and theater movies, where she represents virtues of hope and bravery. Reporting by David Vives, NTD News.
A mountain ambulance service in the north of England is testing the use of an Iron Man-style jet suit. It could be used in reaching hikers in distress.
In England's vast Lake District National Park, reaching hikers in distress can be challenging. Great North Air Ambulance Service has teamed up with jet suit maker Gravity Industries. It wants to see whether the firm's body-controlled jet engine-powered suits can help them reach patients faster.
It's absolutely astounding how quickly we're going to be at somebody's side that needs us.
The two recently staged a test on a Lake District peak. Gravity Industries founder and test pilot Richard Browning flew from the bottom of a valley to a simulated casualty site. Walking to the site would have taken about 25 minutes. Gravity Industries says Browning covered the distance in about 90 seconds. It's hoped the collaboration could eventually lead to the world's first jet suit paramedic.
The potential is just huge. First flight in Cumbria for a jet suit that's going to save lives and ease suffering, so incredible moment, truly incredible moment.
Browning launched Gravity Industries in March 2017. He's since flown more than 100 flight events across 30 countries. His body-powered jet suit can reach speeds in excess of 80 miles per hour.
A network of salty ponds may be gurgling beneath Mars's South Pole, alongside a large underground lake, raising the prospect of life on the red planet.
Italian scientists reported their findings Monday, 2 years after identifying what they believe to be a large buried lake. The scientists provide evidence of the salty underground lake in their latest study. It is estimated to be 12 to 18 miles across and buried 1 mile beneath the icy surface of the planet.
We are more than satisfied. We think that the discovery in 2018 opened a way, and with this new discovery, it becomes a milestone regarding our understanding of Mars.
They've also identified 3 smaller bodies of water surrounding the lake. These ponds appear to be of various sizes and are separate from the main lake. Roughly 4 billion years ago, Mars was warm and wet like Earth. The red planet eventually morphed into the barren, dry world it remains today. The research team used a method similar to what's been used on Earth to detect buried lakes in the Antarctic and Canadian Arctic. They based their findings on more than 100 radar observations by Mars Express from 2010 to 2019. The spacecraft was launched in 2003.
The data is that which was obtained from the MARSIS, Mars Advanced Radar for Subsurface and Ionosphere Sounding, radar, due to its peculiarity of being able to penetrate the subsurface. And for this, those that were obtained are for the most part radargrams.
All this potential water raises the possibility of microbial life on or inside Mars.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.
An explosion strikes a chemical plant in central China. It's the second blast to rock the country this week. In the first presidential debate, both candidates agreed the U.S. must take a tougher stance on China. House Republicans have since released a report about how to do it. China's week-long National Day holiday has begun. 550 million people are expected to travel, despite cases of CCP virus rising across the country. The U.S. has reportedly sanctioned China's biggest chipmaker. An expert says it could be a fresh blow to China's military. And we explore just how dependent Germany's car industry is on China, after it has repeatedly ignored the country's human rights issues. A scholar argues that the dependence narrative might not be justified, but instead presented as an excuse for the industry's behavior. Tune in at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time and tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time to watch the full China in Focus.